Hi, this is GP here. Welcome to another episode of GP Ka CLAT Funda. This is the third episode, and today we'll be looking at last minute test for legal reasoning for students who are going to be taking CLAT 2022. You have just about 30 days with you, so we thought it will be useful for you to give you a roadmap as to what is to be done in the last 1 month or so to CLAT. Okay. Now, before I move on to the paper as to क्या करना है, वह ये जरूरी है. क्यों जरूरी है? Because every time I find a few students asking what is the structure, how many questions, how many passages. So while majority of you would be aware, I think it is still worthwhile to repeat the structure. That is 8 passage, approximately each passage is over 450 words. Each passage has 5 questions, so you're supposed to answer 40 questions. So after reading the passage, you have to answer 5 questions pertaining to the information given in the passage. That's what you're supposed to do. So you could say it is very similar to reading comprehension, possibly yes, but let me move to the next slide first. Okay. Now, what is legal reasoning? Okay. Now, what is legal reasoning? It is a test of comprehension and decision making. Why am I saying it's a comprehension and decision making test? Because you have a passage. Okay. The passage has some information given to you. Okay. Okay. And by and large, it gives you a particular principle which is not defined, which may or may not be explicitly given, but you have to identify, you have to infer the principle. And once you have inferred the principle, you have to understand the extent to which it can be applied or the limitations of the principle. So the passage reading should be able to give you the principle, and it should also give you to what extent or to up to what level it can be applied, and which is why I say it is a test of comprehension so that you can identify the principle, and decision making so that you can understand the limitations of the principle also. Okay. And this is what I would always say. And more importantly, ये मैं नहीं कह रहा हूं. This is what CLAT has said. When CLAT 2020 came out with the new pattern, Professor Faizan Mustafa created a video and shared it. It's available on the YouTube. Please go through it. He said very, very clearly, CLAT is not a test of memory. भैया NLU law पढ़ाएगा, आपको law की आने की जरूरत नहीं है. You don't have to have knowledge of law, and your job is to reason and draw inferences. यही CLAT में करना है. So please don't worry about anything else except the passage in front of you. Understand, read it carefully, understand, and move on to the question. That's what your job is. Now let me come to the important questions. पहला सवाल, कितना टाइम बताना चाहिए इसमें? Okay. Obviously, you have 8 passages. I will say at least 35 minutes and maximum 40 minutes. Okay. Now this has to be looked at in context of the paper as a whole. Okay. You have 120 minutes of the paper. This passage has got 40 questions. This section, sorry, has got 40 questions. This is legal reasoning. This is CLAT. Okay. And CLAT has got 150 questions. Okay. Now, end of the day, when you look at this particular paper, by and large, I would say if you can do a question in 1 minute, a 1 minute per question is good enough for us. Okay. Why am I saying that? Because after out of these 150 questions, you have 35 questions of GK or current affairs. And this is going to take you more than 10 odd minutes. So if you forget about these 135, these 35 questions of GK, you are left with 115 questions between comprehension English, legal reasoning, logical reasoning, and quantitative aptitude to be done in about 110 minutes. So, which is almost 1 minute per question. So, that also tells you that when you're looking at this section, you have got these 40 questions, and can you do it in 1 minute per question? And which is why you, in a way, get the upper limit of 40 minutes. Okay. The other way to look at this is, yes, how much time will I take? If I have to look at the passage, remember the passage about 450 words. A 450 words passage, most of you, majority of you who have been preparing, will do it in about a minute, minute and a half. Let me take a 1.5 minutes for the passage. Okay. Okay. And that means you have about 3.5 minutes for 5 questions, which is doable. And if you have been practicing, you will find that this is doable. So, end of the day, I will say anything less than 35 minutes is a problem. But if you are spending more than 40 minutes, even that is a problem because that is going to impact your other sections unnecessarily. Okay. So that's the first thing which you need to remember. Second thing, how much time to give? I'll say look at the paper structure. Are the passages the regular length, 450 words or so? Maybe you can go with whatever time slot you have chosen. you find the passages becoming slightly longer or slightly shorter, then your time could go towards 40 or 35 minutes, depending on the length of the passage or length of the question. Okay, so this is something you will need to do in the paper on the spot. But whichever kind of paper you get, if you look at CLAT, if you look at CLAT 2021 or CLAT 2020, or you look at the sample papers which was released by CLAT before CLAT 2020, all of them will tell you something like a 35 to 40 minutes, a fair amount of time, and that is what I would suggest you should look at. Okay. Most importantly, please stick to your time limit. ये क्यों कह रहा हूं? क्योंकि हमको ना लीगल करने में मजा आता है, and जब मजा आता है, we forget there's a time limit attached to it. And मजे मजे में, if instead of 40 minutes you make it 50 minutes, you can be very very sure you have taken away 10 minutes from your last section, and your last section is going to suffer. So please stick to the time limits which you have decided for yourself. Your job is to make sure you stick to the time limits and do justice to each section, क्योंकि हर section में आसान सवाल होते हैं, वो आसान सवाल नहीं मिस करने हैं हमको. Okay? So that is the time part. Let's look at the second thing. कब attempt करना चाहिए? Do I start with legal? Okay. After all, how many sections are there? 5 sections. What are the sections? Let me say current affairs or okay, let me write it as GK. GK, current affairs. Then you have quantitative aptitude. And then you have 3 sections which are primarily what I would call reading section. जहाँ पे पढ़ना है, passage पढ़ना है, समझना है, answer देना है. Which are those? English. Then you have logical reasoning, logic, and legal. These 3 sections are similar in terms that you have to read a passage and answer the question based on the passage. Now, out of the 3 sections, I would say this is the easiest. क्यों? दिमाग नहीं लगाना. Passage में given है, meaning of the question will be factual. पढ़ो, answer करो, आगे जाओ. This is a section which you can do fast. Okay, and इसमें दिमाग नहीं लगाना पड़ता है. So the other thing what you also need to remember is that it is in a way precursor to these 2 sections. These 2 sections you have to apply your brains to a greater extent as compared to the English. So मेरा पहला चीज ये होता है कि जब भी करना है ना, कोई ऑर्डर नहीं है, you have to decide for yourself. तुमको क्या पसंद है, what is more comfortable for you, that is what you should be going for. Okay, but I would always say that look at the easy to score sections first and your strong sections first. ये पांचों सेक्शन में जो सेक्शन तुमको मालूम है, you will do fastest or you will be able to get the highest score. That is a strong area. That is what you should be looking at doing first. But in general, I will say if you look at legal, I will say it has to be after English. Why? Because after English, your momentum of reading has gone up and you will be able to solve. So it could be English, legal, and logic, or it could be English, logic, and legal. Okay, it could be any of these 3. But what about the other 2? Other 2, which is GK and Quant, they are jokers in the pack for you. They could come here, they could come here, they could come here, or they could come here. Again, I am saying based on what is your comfort level, what, and you have taken many mock clats with us. अब तक तो पता चल गया होगा ना क्या काम करता है. Just stick to it. Okay, that is what my suggestion would be on when should you attempt this particular section. The last thing is how to attempt. सबसे बड़ी कहानी तो यहीं पे होती है ना. And यहाँ पे many times people say read the questions so that you know what the question is asking. Go to the passage. I'm frankly not a fond of this method at all. Well, some of you might be doing it, and if you're gaining out of it, please stick to it. But my default would be as when I'm reading the question, each of the question in legal is typically 2 to 4 line question, not a short question. That means I'll have to understand what the question is, then go back. I might as well go to the passage, read the passage, understand and what it is all about, and then look at it. And ये इसलिए भी because the passages now very quickly tell us, and if you have practiced sufficiently, ki what is the principle that they are talking about. So my suggestion is read the passage carefully and then move to the questions. Don't worry about reading the questions first. But if you have been doing so, which means you have been reading the question first and then doing the passage, and you are able to do the section in 35 to 40 minutes and you are getting a good score, please change मत करना. So what is the bottom line? जो ठीक तरह से चल रहा है, जो काम कर रही है strategy, उसको साथ चिपक जाओ. Don't change your strategy for the point for just because we are having this session. Whatever strategy of attempting the paper or attempting the section is working for you, भैया उसके साथ चिपक जाओ और कुछ नहीं करना. Last, this is something which I want you to make sure you do. These 30 days are critical for you. पहला काम क्या करना है भैया, बहुत सारे मॉक क्लैट्स लेने हैं. बहुत सारे का क्या मतलब, दो चीजें हैं. वन, यू हैव टू टेक न्यू पेपर्स. How many new papers you can take? Two per week, maximum three per week. Okay, maximum three per week, but I think two is good enough. So if you're going to do two per week, it is perfect. Three is going to be excessive. It's going to be a little on the higher side, not excessive. Four and above, you are killing yourself. You are making a big mistake. दो से तीन बहुत होते हैं. ठीक है. Second thing, okay, क्या करना है? Oh, sorry. ये तो नए पेपर्स की बात की ना. What about the old CLAT papers? Old CLAT papers you have to revise. Old CLAT mocks you have to revise. So new CLATs you have to attempt, two maximum three per week. Old CLAT mocks which you have taken so far, उनमें रिवाइज करना है. क्या रिवाइज करना है भैया, वो भी देख लेते हैं. पहली चीज, look out, go back to those papers and say, okay, which were the confusing questions and passages for me. That is what you have to look at. What should you do? You have to revise these bookmarked questions and the passages. Question में क्या देखोगे? गलती हुई थी तो क्यों हुई थी? What are the mistakes I committed? In the passage, what will you do? You will focus on identifying the principle and looking at the limitations or to the extent to which it can be applied. So old papers are extremely important. Most of you would have taken 20-25 papers already. Please go back to each of those papers. हर रोज दो पेपर उठाओ. Pick up two papers on a day and go through all the question and passages. Identify which were the ones which created problem for you, which were the difficult ones for you. Identify, and based on that, start revising them. So what I want you to remember is you have to revise these once a week. Okay, once per week, these have to be revised. Old questions are confusing, old passage which you found difficult, where you could not identify the principle or the extent. These are the ones we actually, because this is what is going to give you speed. This is what is going to clarify your thinking process for you. Okay, and very, very, very important. Professor Faizan Mustafa said this, na? लॉ स्कूल में पढ़ाया जाएगा, अभी लॉ करने की जरूरत नहीं है. Your job is to stick to the principle, identifying the passage. Whatever that principle is, that is what you have to go with. It is possible the principle identified in the passage may contradict your legal knowledge. होता है, occasionally it has happened, but not very common. But if it happens in one passage and you are sticking to your legal knowledge, भैया फिर अगले साल क्लैट फिर से देना पड़ेगा. So please remember, it is the principle which is important. Okay? And one last thing, ये चीज हमेशा आती है तो मैं इसलिए इसको फिर से दे रहा हूं. People always get stuck. यार familiar passages हो जाता है, unfamiliar passage में तकलीफ आती है. क्यों आती है तकलीफ? क्योंकि you are getting stuck on the knowledge part, you are not focusing on this part. So when you are stuck here, you will always struggle in a passage which is unfamiliar. Let me take a look at CLAT 21. 8 passages. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 familiar and 2 unfamiliar. And it is these two unfamiliar passages, I would say, which were very straightforward. Please remember, when something is given to you which is expected to know, the examiner or the paper setter will most of the time make it slightly more difficult. I would say if you go through these passages, you'll find these were the easier ones. So don't get stuck because unfamiliar passage है. Unfamiliar तो क्या हुआ, मेरे को पढ़ना है, समझना है, आंसर निकालना है उसका. And it is similar to reading comprehension. It is similar to logical reasoning from that point of view. And these questions are slightly different from your principal fact kind of question which used to come earlier, because even when you have a familiar passage, it's a passage on given out here, consent. Okay, consent is very, very clearly, this is a passage on consent. Now this is a familiar passage, but please understand the limitation. The explanation is given in detail. This is in that context slightly different from the passage, the principal fact question which used to come earlier. The extent or everything else or the limitations are given out here, and you have to read, understand, and then answer the question. And the same thing would happen in an unfamiliar passage also. Look at the length of the passage. Consent is a full page kind of a thing, and this is shorter. And just because it says compassionate appointment, something that I have not seen ever, does not make it difficult. All it means is there will be some rules given to me on when a compassionate appointment can be given and cannot be given. So the rule is given, the principle is going to be on compassionate appointment. and when it can be done or not done is something which is going to be explained. Short passage, read it, mark the answer. Don't get stuck. Unfamiliar, what will I do? No, easy. Remember, what is unfamiliar is usually easy as far as competitive exams are concerned. Okay. So एंड में एक बार फिर से देख लें क्या करना है आपको अभी. पहली चीज मॉक क्लैट्स करने हैं. Okay. Mock clats करनी है, and just to repeat, new 2, maximum 3 per week. Maximum 3, I will say stick to 2. Second, old, revise. Okay. Old, you have to revise. Second thing, difficult and confusing. Revise what? Difficult and confusing passages from old ones. You have to revise questions. You have to identify the principle and limitations. And yes, remember, principle is important. Your knowledge is incidental in this whole process. And one last thing जो बोलनी जरूरी है, भैया 35 से 40 मिनट का टाइम देना है. अगर तुमने 40 से ज्यादा देना शुरू किया, then you are going to create a problem for the other sections. और अगर 35 minutes से कम दिया, if it is less than 35 minutes, then you will not be able to do justice to this particular section. So please stick to it. Okay. So with this, I will close the session. Thank you very much. I hope you have liked the session. Please like the session and subscribe to the channel so that you will be in touch with whatever updates we keep on giving you. With this, goodbye. All the best.